Welcome to Session 6, Dyslexia Initiatives in Topeka Public Schools. I'm Robin Dixon, District Pre-K through 5th grade ELA consulting teacher, and I will be your guide through this session. Please note that this session is for elementary. There's also a Session 6 earmarked for secondary staff. Also, ensure that you have watched Sessions 1 through 5 prior to viewing this session. In addition, there will be places where you will stop, pause, and reflect. You may do this individually or with your colleagues. Let's begin by reviewing our learning intentions. Today, we are reviewing the Kansas definition of dyslexia and what dyslexia is not. Today, we are learning the last three components of structured literacy, and you will be learning about morphology, syntax, and semantics at a deeper level. You will know you are successful when you can list and define the last three components of structured literacy, as well as determine how to implement elements of morphology, syntax, and semantics with students. Let's begin by reviewing the Kansas definition of dyslexia as given by the International Dyslexia Association. The Kansas definition of dyslexia says, a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate and/or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede the growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. Let's again review what dyslexia is not. It is not a vision or hearing issue. It is not seeing letters or words backwards, as many believe. It is not attributable to limited intelligence. It is not due to low motivation or limited effort. In fact, students who are dyslexic are very motivated and work very hard to learn to read. It is not due to poor teaching, and it is not rare. It is estimated that 1 in 5 students come to the classroom displaying some characteristics of dyslexia. And finally, it is not a condition that can be outgrown. Let's take a moment to pause, jot, and reflect. Take a moment and see if you can remember in session 5, the first 3 elements of structured literacy. And I want you to then take a moment to write down and reflect on what comes to mind when you hear the words morphology, syntax, and semantics. Once you are ready, you may pause the video, complete the task, and proceed to the next slide when you are ready. Did you list and remember phonology, sound symbol, and syllables from session 5? And what did you write down for morphology, syntax, and semantics? As we walk through this presentation, you can confirm your learning, or you can add to your learning, or adjust learning that is incorrect or needs to be adjusted. So let's review the principles of structured literacy. Please remember that structured literacy needs to be explicit, systematic and cumulative, as well as diagnostic. The 3 elements that we will focus on today are listed on this slide. Morphology. A morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning in language. Syntax, the set of principles that dictate the sequence and function of words in a sentence. This includes grammar, sentence structure, and the mechanics of language. And semantics, which is concerned with meaning. So let's look at morphology. Students with strong morphological skills possess a distinct advantage over students who use a whole word approach to decoding words. With strong morphological skills, students can approach a novel, multisyllabic word and break it into its parts in order to predict the meaning. This skill helps in all areas of literacy: decoding, spelling, comprehension, and oral language. Many times, struggling readers are unable to identify a word they encounter in the text, even though they know it in their oral language. As a result, their expressive vocabulary remains quite limited compared with proficient readers who incorporate novel vocabulary from their reading into their oral language. And you will understand the whole word approach as we go through this section. A whole word means that we are looking at a word as a whole and that we are not breaking it into its individual units of meaning. So again, when we look at morphology, a morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning in language. Prefixes, suffix, roots. A morpheme may be as short as one letter, such as the letter S. This letter adds plurality to the word, such as the word cats. By adding the S to cat, I am changing that word from singular to plural. When I look at words that have prefixes, suffixes, and roots, I can break that word down. For example, if I take the word sugarless, my base word is sugar and it has the suffix less. And I have included a link to an activity if you are wanting to build morphology with students. And what this does is it looks at how to combine prefixes, suffixes, and roots to make new words. So please take a moment after this presentation to look at that activity and see how you can apply it in your classroom. When we look at morphology and we look at a suggested teaching order, the first place to start is in the primary grades, and we look at Anglo-Saxon words. These are words that are standalone words and have standalone meaning. Dog, cat, chair, for example. Latin words, and this is the most common type of affix and root words for us, and these are very common in elementary and secondary, and these are used when we look at multi-syllabic words. These words contain a Latin root and either a prefix, suffix, or both. And we look at Greek morphology. This forms 10% of our words, and they tend to be a combination of root words. Greek also tends to be very domain-specific, such as math and science. When teaching morphology, we must teach the morpheme's role in the word. So for example, adding S, the role of the S is to make it plural. If I take walk to walked, the ED's role is to make it past tense. We also need to teach the types of morphemes to students. They don't necessarily need to know the terms, but they need to know how bound and free morphemes work in the English language. So bound morphemes are prefixes and suffixes. A free morpheme can stand alone as a word and do not need to be combined with other morphemes, such as man or dog. And looking at our preceding slide, that would be words that are Anglo-Saxon in nature. Let's look at some activities that you can try in the classroom to help build your students' morphological knowledge. Here's an activity, find the root. Say the concept of a root word to your students. You might say a root word is the main word in a longer word. And then you can ask your students to highlight the root word. So if we take hopeful, we would want them to find hope. In sleepless, we would want them to find sleep. In childish, we would want them to identify child. And unhelpful, we would want them to identify help. Notice in unhelpful, students have to delineate between the prefix, the root word, and a suffix. Another activity is called Find the Affixes. So explicitly teach students that affixes are extra parts that are fixed onto the word. The affix at the beginning of a word we call a prefix, because pre means before, and a suffix comes at the end of the word. So you can ask students to fix the broken root words with the correct affix. So in this example, we are looking at affixes of suffixes. So how would we combine those? So we know that we would put do with able to get doable. Walk we would add with ing to get walking. Sad, we would add with ly to get sadly. And great, we would add with full to make the word grateful. You can ask students to do an activity such as a word sort. And in this activity, you can ask students to sort the following words according to their affixes. Then they should guess the meaning of the affix based on their prior knowledge and the patterns they see. For example, in this list of words, we would put forgetful and careful together. And we would use our knowledge of the word full to determine what careful means, or full of care. Forgetful, full of forgetting. You would also combine disappear with disown, and know that dis means not, so disappear would mean to not appear, and disown would be not to own. And then you would combine shipment and government with the affix meant. Other activities that you can try with your students are the following. You may try word sorts with self-discovery to aid in recognition of word families based on morphology or orthography. Explicitly teach and instruct the syllable types to recognize orthographical patterns. Word manipulation through blending and segmenting morphemes to further solidify patterns. Flashcards, syllabication, word analysis by reading, letter tiles, etc. As you encounter a word with an affix in reading, stop and talk about that word. What does that word mean with the suffix in the context of the sentence? And also, what are some other words that are related that can help us to determine meanings of words in other scenarios such as science or social studies? So let's take a moment to pause, jot, and reflect on morphology. What was new? What confirmed what you already knew? And how will it look to apply principles or morphology to your classroom? So take a moment to pause the video, reflect on those questions alone or with your colleagues. And when you are ready, please start the video and proceed to our next session of the presentation. Let's move on to the element of syntax. And syntax is the set of principles that dictate the sequence and function of words in a sentence. This includes grammar, sentence structure, and the mechanics of language. So syntax is the study of rules, principles, and processes that govern the structure of sentences, specifically word order. It refers to sentence structure and the variation of phrases and clauses which the author manipulates for a variety of reasons. And these reasons can include to fit the occasion or situation, to reach a specified audience, or to achieve a given purpose. When we teach syntax, these are elements that we need to keep in mind as we teach our students. Number one, all sentences must have a subject and predicate. We also add adjectives and adverbs in sentences. We also have types of sentences such as simple and complex. Punctuation. If we have, for example, a question mark or an exclamation mark, those have very different meanings in the sentence. Semicolons and commas, for example, also have very specific meanings within sentences. We also need to help students realize that words can be used as multiple parts of speech. For example, if we take the word run, it can be a noun. If I said, I want to go for a run this evening, or it can be a verb. I went for a run this morning, or I need to run to the grocery store. And it can also be a multiple meaning word. For example, run can be the physical act of moving quickly. Or run, if I say run to the store, it means I'm going to go to the store. I'm going to run for office. Or I have a run in the fabric. So we have to teach students that words are complex, multiple meanings, as well as multiple parts of speech. Let's look at this sample activity of how this would work with students. So look at the following sentence. It says, the dog ate a, and we have the letter B. So as you were reading that sentence, your mind was already thinking about dog and thinking about the word ate. And your brain was making the connection about what dogs eat. And when you see the letter B, you automatically filled in brain. It was using the syntax to figure out the missing word. We know that what a dog eats and begins with a B is a bone. And this is what our students do as they read. So let's take a moment to think about teaching syntax to students. Here's some activities that you can try with your students. Number one, open-ended sentence starters. By putting this sentence on the board or on by saying the girl went, have students fill that in. You will notice that students have to fill in many parts of that sentence. You will also see that each student will do this very differently. One student might say the girl went to the store, and another student might say the girl went to the store and bought items for dinner, including pasta, sauce, and meat. Early Saturday morning, which is a clause and needs a subject and a verb. It allows students to practice using their knowledge of syntax to complete sentences. Also, putting words in index cards and having them put those words in order. Sentence elaboration. So starting with the sentence, the bird flew, which is a very general sentence. Maybe having students change the type of bird to a parakeet, a robin, and then adding in prefixes, or excuse me, adding in adjectives. The beautiful parakeet flew and majestically through the sky. So adding in different elements so that students are practicing nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, and other parts of sentences. Also teaching students idioms, similes, and metaphors is extremely important because the syntax is essential to understanding those. And also explicitly teaching grammar to our students is imperative. So let's pause and reflect about syntax. So what learning was new for you? What confirmed what you already knew? And how would it look to apply principles of syntax to your classroom? So pause the video, reflect individually or with your colleagues, and when you are ready, we'll proceed to the last section of the presentation. Let's take a moment to talk about semantics. Semantics is concerned with meaning, and it must include instruction in the meaning of written language, comprehension, and vocabulary. If we look at words on the vocabulary level and meaning, we know that we can have the denotative definition, which is the literal definition of a word, and we can have the connotative meaning, which is the feeling or emotion associated with that word. And we also have to think about that for students, their background knowledge comes into play. Cultural and individual knowledge also comes into the connotative meaning. So for example, if I said the word skinny, we can divide skinny by its definition, its denotative meaning, but we can also look at that connotatively. Does skinny have a positive or negative connotation in the context of the sentence? And how does your prior knowledge and experience play into your definition and meaning of the word skinny? We also need to see how words fit into the structure of the sentence to affect its meaning. How does the word fit into the paragraph to affect its meaning? And how does it fit into the whole text to fit its meaning? So when we look at teaching semantics and teaching vocabulary words, think and keep in mind concept, referent, and symbol. So let's take the word house. So what is the concept of house? In your mind, you're forming a definition and an image of that word. For you, is house a standalone home? Is it a duplex? Is it an apartment? What is your concept of home? And please keep in mind that our students may all come in with different concepts of the word as well. So what is the referent? What picture comes to mind? If I say a house is a standalone home, am I picturing a very specific home? Are you picturing the house that you grew up in or the house that you live in now? And also, what is the symbol? How is that word spelled? Is it C-A-T? as in the English language, or is it gato as in the Spanish language? So try a word on your own. Try the word friend. So in your mind, picture the word friend. What comes to mind? What is the referent? And what is the symbol? Now notice that friend is an abstract noun and house is a concrete noun. So notice how it changes as you're looking and moving to an abstract noun. How does that change your concept, and how does that change the reference that you have in mind? And keep in mind how that might be affected for your students as well. You will have a full class of students that may all have very different concepts of concrete and abstract nouns. So we need to build that knowledge in how it's being used in the context of our reading and our study. Something else that can help with semantics are the use of graphic organizers. This could be Venn diagrams, story maps, compare contrast, sequence, and problem solution if we're looking at the areas of comprehension. These are ways for students to form concepts and ideas in their minds, and solidify their understanding. So let's go back to vocabulary for a moment. Word webs or Frayer models are an excellent strategy to help students build conceptual semantic knowledge. I have included for you a bit.ly to a Frayer model. And I'd like you to stop and pause and complete this Frayer model for friendship. Complete it individually first. How did yours look? Do you have a better understanding of the word? Would this build understanding of your students? And then if you're completing this with colleagues, reflect and share, how are your Frayer models all the same and different? And how did using and looking at another colleague's Frayer model help develop and strengthen your understanding of the word? So let's take a moment to pause and think about our knowledge of semantics. What was new? What confirmed what you already knew? And how will it look to apply principles of semantics to your classroom? So you may now pause the video and begin the video once you have completed that activity. This session explored morphology, syntax, and semantics at a deeper level. After learning about these last three elements of structured literacy, what are your thoughts? What new learning did you have? What do you still want to learn more about? So let's review our learning intentions today. Today we are reviewing the Kansas definition of dyslexia, and we reviewed what dyslexia is not. We also learned the last three components of structured literacy, which are morphology, syntax, and semantics. You are successful if you can list and define the last three components of structured literacy, and you are successful if you can determine how to implement elements of morphology, syntax, and semantics with your students. So congratulations, you have completed the 6th and final session of the Dyslexia Initiative rollouts in Topeka Public Schools. It is time for you to take the post-test, and the post-test is embedded in the Google form for this presentation. If you'll remember back to the first session, prior to that session, you completed a pre-test. And in these 6 sessions, you have learned and expanded your knowledge on the 6 elements of structured literacy, as well as dyslexia. And so it is time for you to take that test and submit that test for approval. And on behalf of the teaching and learning team, we appreciate your time and attention to learning more about dyslexia and the dyslexia initiatives in the Topeka Public Schools.